I think there's a bit of that going on, Tom, but firstly, congratulations to Leah Finocchiaro. The CLP's actually done really well, and they're certainly in the fight for another 5 or 6 seats. It's super tight up there. It'll go to postals. I think the count will take some time. But I was very concerned about statements from Territory Alliance Terry Mills that they would, if they were in coalition with any part of government, end the gas industry in the Northern Territory. We know the Beetaloo Basin is one which is very prospective, has a lot of benefits for jobs and driving the economy in the Northern Territory, and I'm very keen to make sure it's developed. So those who are out there talking against jobs and talking against the economy, I think the people are awake to that, and that's why the vote is as it is.
And when we look at the prospects and what should be happening on the borders then, what's your view on Queensland? Should that state now have open borders for everywhere except Victoria?
Tom, I was appalled at the Queensland Premier's statement last week that Queensland hospitals were only for Queenslanders. I mean, you imagine going to people in the health industry, doctors and nurses and other health professionals, and saying you can only treat a sick child based on the address of their parents in this country. I mean, they'd be horrified. So I think we need to see some common sense in border management. In the resources sector, this is something they've been managing for months now incredibly successfully. The idea that you'll now go to a hard lockdown and prevent what has been the backbone of Australia's economy in recent months from moving forward, I think is a very dangerous idea. And I think we need to ensure that we keep that industry ticking over. And they're going to come up to some challenges. They're due for maintenance in a number of locations that require specialist crews from other areas. So I think we just need to get some practicality and common sense back into the debate.
Right. So that's the management around, as you say, jobs, health, humanitarian reasons as well. I understand that point. But what about more broadly, just being able to openly go in and out of the state? Should that be the case right now? If you look at COVID numbers in Queensland, New South Wales, ACT, I mean, there are no cases in ACT. Active cases in New South Wales, the number of daily cases is very low too. Should the border just be open again?
Well, once again, Tom, we just need to be sensible in terms of this debate. We need to be able to manage outbreaks where they occur, and the Commonwealth has always had an expectation that is what would happen. They do need to be localised controls. I mean, look at the MPs coming to the Territory now. Many of us are coming from areas where there are no cases, and there hasn't been for many months, to a location where there are no cases and there hasn't been for any months. But on return to Queensland, we will go into self-isolation in our residential areas, into our homes. And those are the current rules. We'll all comply with them, but I think we do need to be sensible. This is going to be an issue we have to deal with in the long term. But what does sensible mean
right now? The number of cases, with New South Wales as the example, the number of daily cases we're getting and the very low level of community transmission, would sensible mean opening up the border? You can still question where people have been, and maybe you have a hotspot in Western Sydney, for example, southwest of Sydney. What is sensible? You keep saying sensible, but what is it?
Well, once again, everyone will be taking the advice of the Chief Medical Officer and their own medical officers in the states. And it's been very clearly stated and noticed, and this is the way it's going, Tom, that the Premiers are making their own decisions. So at a Commonwealth level, we are providing advice, but we clearly recognise that it is up to the states and territories. They are the ones making decisions around borders. But I would urge them to make common sense and practical decisions. We have to be able to manage the COVID outbreak in the long term. We have to ensure we get our economy back on track and people back into jobs. And this is not something which is going away.
But what does that mean right now? So Queensland's policy right now on borders, is that too conservative? Is that going beyond the health advice you mentioned?
Well, let's look at the reality. So where you have a border community who has someone who resides on the New South Wales side, but their farm's on the other side, they couldn't get there. If their workforce was put up in an apartment or a hotel on the wrong side of the border, they couldn't go to work. We've had people who have had their equipment on one side of the border and their workforce on the other, so they can't go and get it. We've had any number of cases where people were due for life-saving medical treatment and have been unable to get to the hospital or their doctor for that treatment. So I think we need to be careful that the cure is not worse than the disease. It's a very popular policy, Tom. I absolutely recognise that.
Yeah, right. I know it's popular, but this is what I'm just asking you. I understand you're talking about the various exemptions that should exist. What about someone who's in Sydney at the moment, in an area where it's not there are no cases locally, that's where they live, and they want to visit Brisbane to visit their family. That's the only reason. Should they be able to?
Well, once again, these are decisions being taken by the Premier. It's not up to me as the Minister for Resources. It's not me that's being provided the advice around how that should be managed. Tom, as I've said, I think in the long term, we need to be able to manage the virus outbreak in an appropriate way that takes into account not only the health response but the economic response. If we look at Victoria, and I acknowledge that Dan Andrews had to make some very tough decisions down there, what it's done to the economy and individuals who are now being kept in their houses in a curfew in Australia. I mean, this is the land where we are free. So I think we do need to make sure that as we get ourselves back into a position once again where the pandemic is being managed appropriately, that we do manage outbreaks in a localised manner, that we don't have these broad-scale border closures.
Couple other issues just to get to on the situation with China and seemingly another trade salvo fired at Australia. Simon Birmingham revealed he still can't get a response from his counterpart in China. What about you? Are you getting any direct communication back, a phone call or otherwise? Last time we spoke, you weren't.
Well, they've politely declined at this time. I've had video conferences or teleconferences with my counterparts in the US and Japan and South Korea. We're looking to set up meetings with India and, of course, other members of our trading partners. But at the moment, it's a polite decline.
What's the highest level communication the Australian government is getting from China right now, from the Chinese government?
Tom, that's not a question I can answer. I mean, that's a matter for the Minister for Foreign Affairs. They are the ones that deal with foreign affairs and our diplomatic relationships. For me, I'm talking as often as possible with our counterparts in terms of trade for resources. We're talking around those technicalities about water because we do manage water in an incredibly
but you're not able to
strong way, and that's recognised by
officials. You get to bureaucrat level essentially, and that's where it ends.
Well, it depends on which country we're discussing, Tom. But I've spoken to many direct counterparts in a number of other countries who are major trading partners, particularly to give them some assurance that Australia will continue to provide what is critical for their country around resources, whether that is coal or gas or met coal or otherwise.
Yeah. Just finally on resources, the Labor Environmental Action Group, the network LEAN it's called, is now pushing people in Victoria away from gas. The concern, I guess, that's going on within Labor is that gas remains a fossil fuel. So it's not really much of a transition. And if you have a huge push towards it with infrastructure, you'll be locked into gas for many years when there might be options that are just as cheap or cheaper and lower in emissions sooner. Is that a fair point? That's a possibility, isn't it?
Tom, in the middle of a pandemic where we have 3.5 million Australians on JobKeeper with support from the federal government, the best the opposition can do is come up with a ban on gas appliances. You know, the Butler barbecue ban is their policy. I think Australians would be rightly annoyed if they were told to take out their gas burners, their gas heaters, their gas hot water systems, their gas barbecues to be replaced by something else. So I think there are far more important issues to deal with, but I was a bit concerned it might have been a joke, but they seem serious.
But the infrastructure, the possibility of underwriting infrastructure with billions of dollars of federal money, that would lock us into gas to an extent for a while, wouldn't it?
Well, the intention is to drive jobs and drive the economy and to recover from the pandemic, and gas will be a very large part of that. As a transition fuel, it can certainly be used for peaking plants in terms of the electricity generation. If we can get a competitive gas price, well, we'll have manufacturing back on shore that is internationally competitive. I think that's a good strategy.